I am so excited this week because we have a gentleman that I met nearly 10 years ago. And I did a little filming thing with him. And his name is Dallas Campbell. Dallas, how are you?
I'm very well. I cannot believe it was 10 years ago. And I'm not just saying that.
Maybe I'm actually
It
wrong.
was, no, well, I think it probably was. I was trying to remember. We had a lovely day. I can't remember where we were. We were sitting by a big tree and you had your little pram thing, your radar pram doodah. And we were looking at tree roots. Where the heck were we? Can you
We
remember?
were at Burley, the Burley estate.
Burley, that's right.
And it was I thought it was a brilliant programme that I think should be brought back, called Britain Beneath Your Feet.
That's it.
And you went around with this really fun team of producers and cameramen and soundmen.
Yeah.
And
It was a great team. It was the top team.
I felt like that, actually.
Yeah.
It was really good. And
It was a shame, actually. We only did, because it was a series, but we only did two, which is technically the
Yes.
shortest series you can possibly do. And I feel we should have done more.
I feel that we should do more. So all you BBC commissioning editors out there who are fans of Tree Lady Talks, I
Yeah.
urge you to
All of
do
them.
a new series on that. But perhaps I should explain to the listeners, before it's all about you, Dallas, which of course it will be, is that what we did was we scanned the roots of this 440-year-old oak tree with the tree root radar device, which I worked on for about 10 years. And I'll tell you a bit of a story about that. I was contacted by the BBC to appear on the programme, and I was overjoyed and rather excited and waited 5 minutes before I actually calmly replied and said, I think that would be acceptable. And then I knew the BBC wanted what I call the money shot, which is like the 3D scan thing going round. And it wasn't quite developed. And the inventor was saying, this is going to be out any moment. And I said, yes, but I'm going on the BBC at this date. And he said, oh, yeah, you'll have it by then. I got it the day before in the afternoon, and I had to learn how to use it.
Oh, my God.
And then literally I packed my car, drove up, and then met you all in the hotel, and I'd only used it once. And in fact, on the day, I don't know if you can remember, couldn't quite get it to work. And the producer would say, well, if you can't get it to work, Sharon, I'm so sorry. It's a waste of time. And at the very last minute, I remembered to do something, and it worked.
I had no idea. You were so calm and collected that day. And I think we were all very impressed. And Andrew, the producer and director, he's such a sweet, he wouldn't have minded.
No.
He would have been like, nah, it's fine. We'll do something else.
Well, enough about me. This really isn't about me. So, Dallas, let's start off with your early life. Tell us about young Dallas.
Oh, crike. There weren't many trees involved for young
It
girls.
doesn't
Well,
matter.
how far back do you want to go? I was born in Scotland, near Glasgow, in Kilmacombe, and my father was an airline pilot based out of Glasgow. And then they separated, and I went to live with my mum in the northeast of England. Well, so I lived there for a while in Newcastle, and then I went back up to Scotland. I went to boarding school in Scotland from the age of 12 till 18 in the middle of nowhere in the Perthshire Hills. So I've had a bit of city living and a bit of country living, and then after that I stayed up in Scotland. Actually, when I left school, I ended up working up at the Cairngorms up in the mountains in Cairngorm in Aviemore. So I lived in Aviemore for a bit, and
Wonderful. Oh, I love it up there. I used to go on
isn't it
holiday
amazing?
near there when I was a
Oh, it's
child.
the best. I honestly, I have such a kind of pang for it, and this was kind of the late 1980s, and I worked for the ski school there. So I taught skiing, and I did my ski school instructor's exam, my BASI, and I did a bit of ski racing and that kind of stuff. And that's kind of what I wanted to do, actually. I thought, well, I'm going to be a ski racer. That's what I want to be. And then I realized I wasn't very good. And then I managed to sort of chance it into university.
So what did you read at university?
Pretty lousy A-level grades. Drama. I did drama. That was my other thing. I had actors in my family on my dad's side and on my mum's side. And I thought acting looks quite good. It was a bit bit like it looked like kind of running away, joining the circus acting. It
Mm,
was kind of exciting things
yeah.
happening, and and people and trucks and equipment and gear and lights and things and movie stars, and I thought that'd be quite good. So yeah, so I did that. I
Oh,
went
that's it.
to.
Well, you say you got lousy A levels. My A levels were appalling,
Oh,
and I
what did
worked
you get?
so
I can't remember.
hard. Well, I'm
Did
gonna
you?
go public on this
Okay.
because back in those days, I'm a little bit older than you. We've established that earlier. They didn't deal with dyslexia. They certainly couldn't spell it. I'd never
No.
heard of it, so I wasn't recognised as being a dyslexic. So I was going to be an astrophysicist,
Yes.
and obviously,
Obs.
and I did maths, physics, and geography,
Right. Oh, well, that's perfect. Yeah.
but I got two D's and an E. And I was
That's
gutted, but in the meantime, I'd been volunteering for the British Trust for Conservation Volunteers as a way of having a really cheap holiday on no money, and fell
nice.
in love with conservation and wildlife and trees. And
Perfect.
so at the last minute, I did a geography and landscape studies degree. But
That's it. Things are meant to be,
they
or
are.
if you stick with kind of plan A never pans out.
No.
I'm on plan F,
Yes.
Z. It's life just comes at you like a weighted sock sometimes, and the things that we
Yes.
plan don't. I mean, obviously, because one of the questions people always ask me is like, well, if you did drama, what the hell are you doing science? And it's exactly that. It's exactly the same sort of thing, just a weird set of circumstances that couldn't be repeated if you tried happened.
Well, I think things are often meant to be, but
Mm.
it's not the path that
Hmm.
we necessarily would choose to navigate.
No,
But
no.
you are really well known for some fantastic TV, and you've brought science in a very popular way to the general public. So, first of all, had you always had an interest in science? Did you feel it was for you?
So it's a very good question, actually. I always loved science in the kind of broad definition of the word. I didn't love it as a student. I didn't love it, a bit like I love music, but I don't play anything. Do you know what I mean?
I
It's
know
like
exactly
I
what you
don't I
mean
don't I don't
because, yeah,
study music,
yeah.
but I love music. And that's the
Mm.
thing. No one would kind of stop you coming out of the cinema and go, hang on, you just seen a film, you must be a film director.
Exactly.
you know, I grew up as a kid in the 1970s and 1980s watching Tomorrow's World and watching
Yes.
Horizon and all this kind of the BBC science output, and I used to love popular science, but like
Mm.
everyone else, I was kind of into all that kind of stuff, at the same time I had, the Usborne book of flying saucers, and I was just interested in stuff,
Yes.
and all that kind of thing. So I always had that, and I enjoyed reading science fiction, some science fiction. I'm not a massive science fiction nerd, but I enjoyed reading The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I was so it was that. So I think perhaps I don't know, maybe it's the sort of story of it all that I like. But anyway, the the understanding of how things work and the story of what scientists do all day and the new technologies that were coming along, I was always very interested in. But I'd be the worst scientist on earth. Like I have no capacity to be a scientist. I know what being a scientist is, and I'm not it.
Well,
So,
I think that's why it works, Dallas, is because I think as a non-scientist,
mm.
but with great curiosity and enough learning, you can ask the daft questions. And that's what
Yeah.
I do on this
Well, there
podcast.
you go. I think, well, this is the thing. Very often I think academia is a weird thing, and people are a bit scared to ask dumb questions in case you say the wrong thing. And it's quite
Mm,
nice not being an academic. I have license to kind of ask whatever I want. And actually, when you sort of drill down into subjects, generally the broad brushstrokes of a subject are pretty easy for anyone to understand, even if it's
mm.
astrophysics, whatever it might be. Um, and I think everyone has a natural curiosity about the world, whatever it is, um, astronomy or conservation, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a scientist to be into that. So I sort of defend my I'm just a layman doing science
No,
quite
I think
passionately.
that's
But
great.
the weird thing is, there's some your detractors, people who don't like you, love to point it out. They think, aha, who calls himself a scientist? And I've never
No,
called
you
myself
never
a scientist
have.
ever. I'm just, like the audience. I'm here to find out what's going on.
So, what was the first TV program that you were involved in?
Well, I did when I left university. I went into acting, and I worked as an actor. I did Holby City and, and Casualty and The Bill and all that kind of stuff. So I I was drama is kind of what I did, but I always had this niggling thing in the back of my mind, thinking that I'd like to do television presenting. I had no concept of how one would go about doing television presenting. Um, but it's funny actually. I had an idea. Me and my friend Jonathan. We were drunk in a bar I was in Los Angeles at the time. And he was a kind of sciencey fan and a sort of comedy guy. And we had this idea. So why don't we do like what would be funny would be to do like a science show, but rather than have like Professor X telling you stuff, why don't we have like an idiot kind of finding stuff out, a kind of bottom up science program? And it was right at the time when like Mythbusters had just come out. This was around about 2003, 2004. So there was a few kind of comedy science kind of crossover stuff. And then of course, in America they had Bill Nye, the science guy, doing stuff. And so we came up with this concept which we called Dallas in Wonderland, which we thought was a good
Yeah.
title. And the basic premise was each week I was going to try and do an impossible thing. Like this week, Dallas is going to try and get abducted by aliens. And by not being able to get abducted by aliens, we learn all about aliens. And so we did. So I tried to break the men's 100 meters record and abducted by aliens. And I had to, what else did we do? Oh, I had Journey to the Center of the Earth. Basically, just like ridiculous things. So the whole premise was, genuine inquiry into absurd hypothetical situations. Anyway, we pitched this um, to the Discovery Channel. Was it the Discovery Channel? Yeah, it was the Discovery Channel. And they were like, yeah, okay. Like, oh, shit, we've got to make it now. So it was completely kind of, on spec. This was a long, long, long time ago. We had, and so we teamed up with a production company in America, and we made that, and it was pretty good.
Oh, how brilliant.
We
And
although we got sacked, we didn't get sacked, but we did our little kind of episodes that we had slated, and then we never got recommissioned. And to this day, I'm still annoyed about it because I never really found out the reason why. Just one day they're like, "Nah, it's not Discovery Channel enough." I think we were maybe a bit arch.
yeah. So, what next?
Right, so I have to jump from there to here. What am I doing next?
No,
I'm
no, no,
actually.
no, no. What did you
Oh,
do
I
after
see.
that?
Oh, I
Sorry.
see. Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah, no. What did you
okay.
do after that? I was going to go on
Oh, I
and
see. Yeah.
yeah,
So
because
we
you've done
did
some great
that.
stuff.
We did that, and our contract was terminated. So I'm like, Christ, what do I do now? Anyway, I came back to the UK, and I ended up actually because of doing that show in America. I had an agent, and in the UK, and that was all quite exciting. And anyway, I ended up doing the Gadget Show, which was a Channel 5, consumer technology program with uh, with Jason Bradbury and Susie Perry. And so I did that up in Birmingham. I auditioned for it. I'm like, audition me, and got it. So I ended up doing that. So that was my first. So I guess the Gadget Show was really my first kind of UK mainstream. You're a television presenter doing a science magazine show, and absolute hoot. It was terrific. It was brilliant. So, the variety of that was terrific. You do everything from jet powered skateboards to what luggage to buy. It was really fun.
So, if there was one gadget that you wish you had now that you thought was a brilliant idea, perhaps it didn't take off commercially, what would it be? Sounds like a jetpack, skateboarding.
We did a few. Yeah, I think did I break the record? I can't remember now. We did jet. It's like street luge. It's like a long skateboard that you kind of lie down on with jets. We did all kinds of cool stuff in that way. And this was going back a bit, so everything's completely changed now. But I remember doing like exoskeletons that give you superhuman strength, and I remember doing driverless cars kind of when they were really not a thing.
Yeah.
Actually, actually the gadget show I was doing that must have been 2006 maybe, or 2007, round about then. The iPhone had only just come out that year, the first iPhone, and that was a real line in the sand in terms of technology. Everything changed suddenly. The smartphone, the world changed. Suddenly, social media happened, and so I was just doing the gadget show just on that cusp of that crossover when things were getting interesting. And then from the gadget show, I moved to the BBC and set up a science magazine program on the BBC.
Tell us about that. So,
Well, that was it was called Bang Goes the Theory.
I love that. I
Yeah,
used
me
to
too.
watch
Of
that.
course, it was really good, and it was funny because it was the then controller of Channel 5, Jay Hunt, moved to take over BBC One to become the controller. And I got on well with Jay, and she's terrific. And so she invited me. She's like, "Well, come over, leave Channel 5 and come to BBC One." So I did that. And so I was there right at the beginning of Bang Goes the Theory, and it was just really good. I mean, obviously in my mind, it was going to be Tomorrow's World. And we kept saying,
Yeah.
"Please, can we just call it Tomorrow's World? Why the hell are we not calling it Tomorrow's World? Just call it Tomorrow's World." And I remember being frog marched out of her office saying, "If you say that one more time,
Oh,
we'll sack you."
I think
And
there's
they gave it a bit of I never liked the name Bang Goes the Theory because it always sounded like we were there to kind of be kind of mythbusters, to kind
yeah.
of bust, and we weren't. It was it was a science program. Actually, the thing about Bang that was interesting and different to the gadget show. The gadget show was very much tech, stuff you can buy, consumer tech. And Bang Goes the Theory was much more science. It wasn't kind of washing machine from the future. It was very much trying to unpick science, trying to show what scientists do all day, taking science out of the lab and into people's homes. And we had a 7:30 slot on BBC One, so it was very much kind of family, early early evening viewing, and it was great. And and that show, we covered so much ground. We did everything from tree roots to black holes and everything in between, plus engineering. And I still, every so often I get emails, and it was just at the time now, all the young people who watch Bang, the kids who were kind of into science, are now all doing their kind of PhDs. And people say, "Oh, I'm doing this because, I got into science watching Bang Goes the Theory." And
Well,
that's
that's
a
it.
nice thing.
It's so powerful, isn't it? The power of television,
Mm.
certainly at that time.
That time, yeah.
Yeah, for actually influencing people on all sorts of choices. And I wonder now, though, if TV has the same power to affect change, given that we've got so many other ways of consuming
Yeah.
media, such as, well, this podcast. I've actually been privileged to have a few people say to me that they've become a boroculturalist because of the podcast.
Well, there you go. Well,
And
you
it's
have
just like, whoa, my job is done.
your natural authority, Sharon, just oozes, and people are magnetized.
Yes, that's right.
No, you're right. I mean, the thing is, yeah, when I started doing television, there was television, and that was it,
Exactly.
and radio, obviously, but there was no social media. Um, so TV was kind of it.
It
And
was.
obviously it's changed. And I think, but TV still has a place. I still do TV. I still do Sky at Night and other, bits and bobs, and I do stuff for, Nat Geo and things. But it's very different. Everyone YouTube and social media and tickety talk and all those sorts of things.
It is really different. And
Yeah.
I wonder about trends and influence
Mm.
from so many different levels of media. So I've got two children, and I've got a married son who's 30
I don't
and a
believe you.
daughter a daughter who's 28. And I love my children. I'm really close to them. And I had a conversation with my son and his wife and said, "Oh, what are you watching on telly?" He goes, "Mum, I never watch mainstream TV when it's
Yeah,
on."
that's it. Well,
And
this is, yeah,
at
I
that
don't think anyone
point,
does.
he didn't listen to the radio either. And I said, "Actually, I think there's something really important about having some current media
Yeah.
every day. So if you're not going to read a newspaper, you might at least listen a little bit to a live radio show.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I wonder if we're I called it ghettos of the mind, which is very pretentious. But
No,
if
it's not
we're
pretending.
selecting,
We silo ourselves, and
silo
it's
ourselves.
when we were and I don't want to sound like an old fart, and I realize I sound like an old fart, but there was something special about everybody tuning into the same
Mm,
thing or whatever.
mm.
You tune in to watch a particular program, but I think it does still
It
happen. I
does
mean,
still happen,
there's kind of
actually.
event TV things. People tune in to watch Strictly, or
Yes.
or whatever is the thing that people want to watch. But it's obviously it's much less than it is. I mean, my daughter, who is 17, she's just glued to Tickety Tock
Mm, mm. But
or
I just wonder
Instagram.
about if it's going to lead to people making less informed decisions because they're self-selecting their own media all the
Well,
time, and if there's going to be an
yeah,
increasingly narrow focus. I
I
don't know.
think. Well, it's here. It's I'm caught between two worlds because on one hand I kind of think I can't. Is this healthy? I'm like you. I'm like, is this can this be a good thing? We see so much shite on social media, conspiracy theories and all this kind of stuff. Crikey. I talk about. I give public talks about sort of space travel, and I always get asked the question, "Oh, did we really land on the moon?" And that the fact that even that exists as a question,
Yeah.
like 10 years ago, nobody would have even thought of that. But social media, the way it's set up, it means people find these things, and then you start to buy into these particular ideas and ways of thinking. And lo and behold, we've got flat Earth, and it's like, crikey, where did that
Yes.
come from? But I don't want to be a sort of Luddite. There is a there is a tendency when new technology comes along, and it always does come along, beginning of the 20th century when the sort of telegraph came along. With the progress always comes fear and suspicion, and
Yeah.
things do change. So it's always a bit of a double-edged sword, and we're right in the middle. Right in the middle. We're right on this kind of precipice now of artificial intelligence, which is going to sort of amplify to a great degree all the wonderful things about the digital revolution that we've just had, but I suspect all the terrible things too. It's they seem to be sort of one on the other. I mean, I think it all went wrong with the invention of the printing press,
Well,
presumably.
there you
I mean,
are.
that was that's when the rot set in.
That's yeah.
Gutenberg
Well,
and his
that's a classic example. That's when
printing press.
immense learning, pleasurable reading,
Yeah.
emancipation of
Well, that's it.
various groups and women and
I need
everybody eventually.
emancipating.
Yeah. Uh,
Emancipate me.
yes. So that has been really, really good. And so, yes, I am realizing that I too sound like an old fart saying to my son, well, you should listen to something mainstream every day. It's good for you. And I probably, all the young people listening to this podcast will laugh at me. But
Well, I think young people, this is the thing, you can panic about, oh my God, my daughter just is on TikTok all day, but she's also the most funniest, brightest, cleverest. you know, something's going in.
yeah,
And I think
absolutely.
but when we were kids, he said like an old fart again. There were kind of the moral panic at the time was things like video nasties and Mary Whitehouse saying, all this swearing on television will be the end of society and this kind of thing. And I
Anyway,
was going to
we're
say
all
we turned out all right, but maybe we didn't. I don't know. Maybe Mary Whitehouse was right.
no, I don't think
That was it.
so. I think we're all good. And talking about new media, you have a couple of podcasts which I've been listening to,
Oh,
and
yeah.
perhaps you could just talk about your two podcasts.
Well, I've been doing patented for a long time now,
Yes.
for a couple of years, which I do with History Hit, which is Dan Snow's company, History Dan. And that's a podcast about the history of invention. Actually, so a lot of what we've been talking about how the origin stories of things, of technologies, and why things happened, and what was the kind of the background of that. So I've been doing that. I actually finished that podcast. Again, annoyingly, we've sort of paused it for a moment. We might bring it back, but anyway. And I'm doing a podcast called In Orbit, which is for the UK Space Agency. I have a great interest in space exploration, the history of space exploration, particularly, but also how space now has become such a fundamental part of our lives without people really knowing about it. You think about space and they go, "Oh, bloody Elon Musk," or whatever, and actually, fact that we're doing this now, we would not be able to do without space.
I know. I listened to a couple of those, and I was fascinated that science and inventions that have been created for space travel are actually making a really big difference to us on Earth. Perhaps you could talk about some of the examples.
Well, I mean, things that we just sort of take for granted. You know, you go on your app and you order something on Deliveroo, and it just sort of comes, and as if by magic. There is something almost supernatural, but of course, the only reason that you can do that is because we have GPS, which is satellites in low Earth orbit, and the only way you can get satellites in low Earth orbit is if you stick them on a rocket. The only reason we can have Google Earth, the only reason you can do online banking, just all of modern, the kind of things that we just rely on and take for granted, traffic lights, petrol pumps, being able to look at, the weather. The only reason about climate change is because of putting things into orbit. So kind of everything, society now is completely dependent on our activities with satellites in orbit. And so getting up there is obviously very, very important, and it's changing rapidly. It's becoming cheaper, which means satellites are getting smaller. It's becoming, open to commercial organizations rather than just governments that can do this kind of thing. And it's going to change everything again. It's getting much more and more, cheaper, smaller, more productive.
So would you go to space if you had the chance?
Well, this is the other thing. I mean, the part of the reason I think we're all, when you're a kid, you're interested in space and you're interested in dinosaurs and Tutankhamun. Those are the kind of the three things, flying saucers maybe. And so my interest in space, I think, again, probably my age. I grew up just Apollo was happening, or it had just happened. Going to the moon was what we did, and that idea, it's so kind of cemented in my brain, those images of the Apollo moon landings, and also things, when I was a bit older, the space shuttle. So I remember seeing all that. And now, of course, because of social media and everything else, astronauts are so visible in a way that they weren't 20 years ago. And I think that idea of space, not just as being a useful thing, a useful place where you can put satellites, which is useful, but as a new frontier, a new horizon, is something to be explored. There is something very, well, just kind of fundamentally human about wanting to know what's beyond the horizon. Like what's that dot out there? Can I land on it? Is there life on it?
Yes.
We want to meet the neighbors. We want to do all these things. And so I've always been interested in that. And also there is something, I think there's something, the idea of the astronaut, I don't know, there's something almost kind of magical about the human that dons the special robes and ascends into the heavens. There's something quite spectacular about that story, about the chosen ones. There is something quite that is appealing about the idea of the astronaut. Heroic. I suppose like the sailors back in the day who would go off and explore new lands, they'd be kind of heroes. But the astronaut, even more so, they leave the Earth. There's something quite I want to, not spiritual's the wrong word, but do you know what I mean? Almost,
yes,
it was almost supernatural. There was an awesomeness about it.
Awesome in the proper sense of the word.
This episode of Tree Lady Talks is sponsored by Green Blue Urban. We're so pleased that Green Blue Urban are going to be exhibiting at our forthcoming event, more of which at the end of this podcast.
For more than 30 years now, since 1992 actually, Green Blue has been operating at the interface between the urban space and nature, bringing nature into our cities. And while our central mission is generally around creating canopy volume for trees in urban areas, the way in which we do business as a company is continually moving forwards. Our innovative tree pit solutions enable trees to grow to their full species potential and longevity. So it's really important that the systems that we use and we manufacture here in Bodiam, East Sussex, are fit for purpose. They'll enable the trees to do that. And they're made from recycled material, recycled plastic, and actually they are recyclable up to 5 times afterwards at the end of their product life cycle. Rather than disposing of materials, plastics and so on at the end of their life, we feel it's really important that we can reuse those and create tree pits in which trees can grow, they can do well, they sequester the carbon that is actually used in their original manufacture. So you really have got a truly circular economy product.
I too, as a child, was very obsessed with space and also aliens.
Yeah.
And my personal view is that how could we be so arrogant to think that we're the only people, that we're the only living things
Yeah.
in the universe? I don't know. I don't have any theories or any knowledge. It's just a thought. And whilst we are looking at the nearby planets and solar systems and would that be suitable, I don't know. I rather like the fact that we don't know. Some people think they do, and I respect their views. But I don't know what your thoughts are on the matter.
Well, I think you're right. I think, I mean, certainly if you talk to scientists, particularly scientists in that area, cosmologists, astrophysicists, astrobiologists, people who actually are really thinking about this, I've yet to meet one who would say, "Nah, it's just us."
Yeah.
I think, the space is pretty big.
Yeah.
There's a lot of real estate out there. And of course, it brings us to the great question, what we call the Fermi paradox. Enrico Fermi was a famous physicist who, in the 1960s, I think it was, famously stood up and said, well, where is everybody? And so that's the question. Like, well, if there is life out there, and let's assume there is, well, why can't we see it? And where is it? And is it more intelligent than us? And all those wonderful questions.
Yeah.
And we just don't know. And it's really, I can't think of a bigger question in science or a more appealing question in science. And I hope in my lifetime we'll have an answer to that, because I think, we've got a data set of one. We know one place where there's life. And we know that all life on this one place has a common ancestor. So if we found life somewhere else, even within our solar system, I think then we say, well, okay, all bets are off. It's everywhere. It's common. And I think that would be really exciting. I'm very interested in the history of that question as well, in how we've gone about thinking about life using technology. So obviously in science fiction, we can go all the way back to the ancient Greeks thinking about, Selenites living on the moon and that kind of thing. But then I think about, the invention of radar and telescopes. And as soon as we had that, we started to do SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and looking for transmissions in the solar system and beyond. Frank Drake, some listeners may have heard of the Drake equation. Frank Drake, who was an astronomer who wanted to try and really formalize that question. If you wanted to ask, well, how many civilizations are in the universe, how would you begin to ask? So he took lots of kind of factors, n equals, number of rate of star formation, number of planets around a star, number of planets in the Goldilocks region, and then you multiply them together and it spits out a number. Now, of course, it's a silly thing, really. It's not really an equation. It doesn't give you an answer, but it does give you a way to make television programs about it. It's quite a good hook, if you like, quite a good way to sort of think about it. I made a documentary about it with Frank, about the history of that, going back to the 1960s and talking about Carl Sagan, who was very involved in that. And then, of course, we think about things like the Voyager records, the Voyager spacecraft, which left in 1977 to explore the unmanned, went to explore the outer planets. They were probes. But on it, we attached these golden records, this kind of record of humanity, and on it was music and images and writing and that kind of stuff. In case it gets intercepted by some extraterrestrial intelligence, because here we are throwing this message in a bottle out into the cosmos. It'll go forever. Long after the pyramids are gone, long after the Earth has been swallowed up, the Voyager spacecrafts will still be traveling through the interstellar medium. And so you want to kind of think about, well, what is it that we want to say about ourselves? What things are important? And that story is interesting because, you look at it now and it's a time capsule from 1977. And of course, you would put completely different things on there now. We're a different species to what we were in 1977. But I quite like that it's a moment in time for all of its things you might change. There is just something rather nice about it. They had 6 weeks to collect all the data. Carl Sagan and the others are like, well, we want to put this record on. And NASA were like, well, you've only got 6 weeks, so you better get a move on. And then they had to do all the business and clear the copyright rules. And no, we want to put the Beatles on, but the Beatles couldn't do it because of copy, blah, 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 blah. And then they got it together and off it went. And that's the way it should be, really. It's a much better way of doing it than having all the time in the world and having all the people in the world thinking about it. Just, I don't know, do something.
They would never agree. There'd be various committees and
wars.
subcommittees.
Oh,
so,
can you imagine? It'd be awful.
no, there's something about doing something fast and once is often the best thing in life, don't you find?
Well, this is the thing, and perfection is the enemy of done, and
Yeah.
and our quest for perfection is a silly quest. It's the thing that makes human beings wonderful is that we're a bit shit.
Yes,
You
and
know,
that's
when
the premise for this podcast, actually.
Not at all. You're excluded. You're the only exception to that as perfect. But it's that thing. People talk about AI, for example. Well, what's the point if AI can do it better? And I think that the thing that will be of value is the fingerprints in the clay bust of someone's head that we make. The fact that you can see the human hand, and it is a bit rough, and it's a bit, that there will be value in that, and there is value in that. I mean, that's the thing. It's,
I think that's such a wonderful and beautiful point because we are human beings, and whether you call it a soul or whatever, we are emotional. And that's why if everything just moved forward to be more and more perfect, we wouldn't enjoy abstract art.
Yeah.
We wouldn't enjoy somebody playing one musical instrument, and we wouldn't have suffered so during the lockdowns because we need contact. And so I wonder if you feel that AI is simply an opportunity and will help us, let's say, for example, in finding is there anyone else out there, or if you feel it's going to take over, because I'm less concerned about it. What are your thoughts? Because we need that humanity.
Yeah, I mean, I go from kind of wild optimism to deep pessimism, which is probably, I mean, honestly, AI, it is amazing AI. I mean, I use kind of large language models to help me write and to ask questions, and it's extraordinary. And I think the thing is, it will change everything. Everything is going to change massively. I think things like, what do I know? But I think things like climate change, life beyond Earth, all those big things that depend on, computers at the moment, writing code or whatever, computer models in order to understand things, will get better and better and faster and much more accurate. So in terms of things like that, I think, I can see how wonderful it is. I don't know in terms of art. It's really I don't know. It's it'll be different for sure.
I think there'll be a novelty time, though. This is the Tree Lady Talks rubbish prediction of just like off the top of my head. I mean, if you think about it, there's been music in the charts which has been produced by AI.
Yeah.
And I hope that that's a fad, because I think that people want to feel emotion from something else that has emotion. They want to have the human connection. They want that messy humanity.
Well, that's the thing, but does it mean you're going to lose the messy humanity? I mean, when Dylan went electric in 1960, whenever, and everyone freaked out because, wait, Dylan can't go is it just that again?
Maybe.
I don't know, because AI, it depends what we do with AI. I mean, it's just a tool. That's the thing. It's just a hammer, really.
Yes.
Just a really complicated one. It sort of depends on what we want to do with it. I worry about AI in global politics, like everyone else. I worry about the sort of. I do worry about the implications of AI. I just read Mustafa Suleiman's book. Actually, I recommend everyone read it. It's called The Coming Wave.
Okay.
And Mustafa Suleiman, I'm a bit of a fan of his, partly because he grew up around the corner from here. Probably watched Bango's The Theory. He's of that age,
Yeah. And by the way, for those of listeners who are watching you on YouTube and you say he's just round the corner from here, you're not perhaps in a spaceship. He's not in the next spaceship.
No. And I think Mustafa Suleiman grew up on the Caledonian Road.
I know the Caledonian Road.
Anyway, he ran Google DeepMind, which is one of the big, the big AI company that I've been following for a long time. I remember they had this great breakthrough when, this is the interesting thing. They taught a computer to play all the Atari games Space and all those kind of Atari games from kind of first principles. And there was this one Atari game called, I think it was called Breakout, and it didn't know how to play Breakout. So the ball just kind of, basically you've got these cubes at the top of the screen, and the idea is to knock them all out. And it would sort of do it and lose straight away, but it learned very, very quickly. But not just like a human would learn. It realized that if you drill the kind of hole with the bouncing ball up to the top and bounce the ball off the top, you could get rid of all the blocks much, much quicker. And the fact that a computer figured that out was like a big moment. And then from then on, of course, it beat the world AlphaGo player in South Korea. And suddenly it's like, oh my God, we've developed this technology, which is better, in inverted commas, that's a valued term, but better than human brain. That's quite a profound technology. This isn't just the latest iPhone. This is fundamentally going to change the way that we operate as a species. And we don't know what's going to happen. And that's why everyone's slightly freaking out. It's why Rishi Sunak and had their kind of moratorium in London a few months ago, where they got all the tech leaders to say, listen, we kind of need to regulate this a little bit. Otherwise, it's a free for all.
Yeah.
If you've got like super intelligence, in the wrong hands, doing the wrong, again, in inverted commas, the wrong thing, who knows what's going to happen? It's dangerous, new technology. We need to kind of understand it, and it's going to be, I think it'll be messy. Who knows what's going to happen? I think wonderful things will happen. I think terrible things will happen.
I think you're right. And I too have heard that gentleman whose name I can't pronounce.
Suleiman.
Yes.
Mustafa Suleiman. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
I hope I've got his name right, by the way.
He's absolutely brilliant. I've heard him on some podcasts. The Coming Wave.
Yeah, he's very good.
I've heard of the book. I haven't read it, but I think I shall. Yes, we're going to have to watch this space. I think personally regulation is the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, we had it, in the early 90s when the internet happened, and we were all suddenly surfing the web.
Yes.
And that digital revolution kind of happened, and it changed everything. Social media's changed such a lot. The way we do everything, the way we shop, the way we bank, the way we meet people, everything has completely changed in the last 30, crikey, I'm old, 30 years.
Well,
so but a big hockey stick graph in terms of change and speed of change and fundamentals of change, I think, with AI.
I totally agree with you. But one of the other things you do is you help people present better, and you're involved with FameLab, and that gets to the heart of what we enjoy as human beings, another person's voice. Tell us about your work there, and give me some tips.
Well, here's the thing. I spent my entire life in front of a camera or on a stage doing stuff. And sometimes it goes well, and sometimes I'm shit. And I'm still having, it's still a mystery to me. It's not like I have all the answers, but I'm really interested in that. I'm interested in performance, and I'm interested in how people behave on stage. I'm interested in public speaking. I'm interested in what is it that makes some people magnetic on stage and other people not, like what's going on. And so I'm experienced in doing it. And so I like to help people who are less experienced, perhaps, who worry about public speaking, or worry about giving presentations or talks, or worry about being in front of a camera. Because, if you want a tip, my tip is, and this probably comes from acting, actually, when you go to drama school or you study acting, you spend 3 years really not learning how to act. Basically, the idea of good acting is it should be invisible. You don't want to see it. If you watch someone and they're overacting, it's awful, But if you watch someone who's brilliant, you're like, well, I could do that. So he's not doing anything. It's so easy. And it's the same with presenting. The secret to good presenting is just don't present. Stop presenting. And so when I work with people who have got things coming up and they're worried about it, that's kind of my only note, really, is just stop presenting. And actually the thing that makes a good presenter, I think, is it's not so much I'm going to learn lots of things and therefore I'll be a good presenter. It's the opposite. It's the eradication of blocks. It's all the bullshit that's going on in your head that is the thing that's stopping it, that natural flow, that natural connection with the audience. When you're sitting around the Christmas table with your family or your friends, or you're in the pub or whatever it is, You're not thinking about what should I do with my hands.
No.
Do you know what I mean? You're not. So why is it you're thinking that when you're going to go on stage? Why do we suddenly go all kind of? I play the guitar really badly. Um, when I'm on my own playing the guitar, it's easy. I sound great. My fingers move and it's easy, and I'm like, I'm pretty damn good. And then I play in front of someone, and I just seize up, and my fingers don't work, and I get tense, and you know, and that's how humans are. Because especially if it's important, if there's things at stake, we tend to clam up a bit. And so I run these kind of presenter therapy courses where basically I deprogram you and let
That
you give,
sounds really, really good because
give you
I,
permission to be good.
yeah, no, I've carried out a lot of public speaking over the last 30 years, and I sort of
Mm,
forced myself to do it because I'm one of those, well, a lot of people are like it, like quite nervous, extrovert,
mm,
introverts,
mhm.
and a need to show off. And so, I've carried out a lot of public speaking,
Yeah.
and I went through a phase of being very nervous and a phase of being not quite so nervous and I don't think as good. And I've gone full circle as being nervous and preparing more and actually
Yeah.
enjoying it more
It's a,
ultimately.
yeah, well, that's the thing. I think nerves, people say, well, how can I stop being nervous? I'm like, well, you can't.
No.
And also, you don't want to stop being nervous. Being nervous means whatever you're doing is of value, and
Mm.
therefore you want to do it well. So use your nerves as a great motivator and a reminder that actually what you're doing is worth doing. I'm a great believer in preparation. Well, this is everything, it's context dependent. But I'm a big, I think I subscribe to the prepare like your life depends on it, perform like you don't have a care in the world.
Yes.
And I always talk to people. I said, well, listen, think about who is it that you like to watch. Just name someone, a presenter maybe, or an actor, or a politician, or a musician, or whoever. And people there's always kind of, well, I like Barack Obama and I like David Attenborough, and they think about these people. And I say, well, all those people that you mentioned, they all have one thing in common. They're not presenting, they just are. They have that confidence, that
Mm.
self-confidence, because they love what they're talking about. They believe what they're talking about. And if you believe what you're talking about and you love what you're talking about, you cannot go wrong.
Yes, I agree
You
with
know,
that.
because we don't want polished presenters. Nobody wants a polished, hi, I'm a presenter.
Yeah.
We just want people who care about what they talk about, and or we want to see your personality. Again, it's the thing with the thumbprints in the clay. We
Yeah.
like to see the rough. We don't need to see polished. When people are passionate about what they do and love what they do, they become magnetic because that sort of passion naturally comes over. I hate it when presenters try and over egg it and go, oh, look at me, and they all start to force the enthusiasm. So you can see it a mile off.
Mm.
I'm like, oh, just calm down, stop, just tell us about the thing, and
Yeah.
that'll be enough. But
Yeah.
that's a confidence thing, having the trust in yourself. Like acting, just do less, do less, do less.
Yes.
My very first acting job on this, it was a TV series. I was up in Newcastle, and it was called Spender with Jimmy Neal.
Oh,
Do you remember that?
yes.
And he was
Yes.
a sort of it was a detective show, and it was a big show on BBC One. I was absolutely shitting myself, and it was my first kind of TV job, straight out of been doing drama, and I had to do this scene with Jimmy Nail, and I'd learnt my lines like obsessively because I was terrified about forgetting my lines, and so I'd learnt my lines, and then suddenly I'm on set. And the first time I'd been on set, and there were people, lighting people, and makeup people, and there's this kind of it's the most distracting place you can be on a TV set, and they put the tape measure in your face, and the woman at final touches, and the woman she comes and does the makeup, and how can you concentrate on this? And then the clapper loaded with a board goes click, act three, take two, and then and then action, and then the whole place goes silent. And honestly, my heart was just going ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. And just these words just like
Yeah.
fell out of my mouth, kind of in the right order. But I had no concept of any meaning behind them.
Yeah.
It was just like some words, and that cut. Anyway, the director said, that was great, Dallas. That's really good. Just listen. He said, come here. He said, don't worry, just relax. And he said, here's a tip. Just because they say action, you don't have to do anything. And it was the best tip ever
Yeah.
because I had such fear. And actually, action, just enjoy the pause and don't worry, just have, once you develop that self-confidence through doing it, just the experience of having done it lots of times, it's totally liberating. And it becomes liberating when you know whatever you say, however you say it, it's going to be really brilliant.
Well, you have me spellbound there.
And that's a great, it's a wonderful power, and someone like, if you like Barack Obama, part of the reason he's so good is because he has that. He oozes self-confidence, and he takes his time, and he's not scared of pausing, and he just tells it how it is. And that's, if you can do that, that's all you need to do. The problem happens when you start to try and do more, and you start to add, and you start to think, oh, I should do something because then it starts to get a bit messy.
Fascinating. So
I'm available for hire. I'm very expensive though.
Well, reassuringly so.
Reassuringly expensive. Yeah.
So what else are you working on at the moment?
Well, I'm doing a bit of, the kind of coaching I do, public speaking, presenting coaching, I always did as a bit of a hobby. I used to do it with kind of early career academics. This thing, FameLab, which doesn't exist anymore. It was a bit of a competition, like who can pitch their PhD in 3 minutes the best. And it was, and it was a way to get academics to think about communicating with the public, which I think is a very important thing. But I'm still doing that. So I'm working with clients, helping them write their talks, being a sounding board, helping soothe their existential public speaking crisis, which I really enjoy, and writing a new book, which I'm not allowed to. I can talk about it, but I never do because I really hate. I hate it when people bang on about books they haven't written yet. I'm like, tell me about the book once I can buy it. Then I'll tell you about it.
It's up to you. But this podcast wants to know.
Okay, it's a space history book. I've written a space history book. This is another space history book.
Very good.
I'm interested in science history a lot. I like understanding the sort of connections between stories and the connections of how science happened. Like, where did that come from?
I think in my profession of arboriculture, it's the same. People want to know, how did it start? What were the early things that people were doing? How has it progressed? Oh, look, that was a daft attitude, and look how we are now. I always see everything as a moment on a time in history. So nobody knows it all now. Just because we're not right.
Well, this
people
is it.
Will look back and say, "Oh, that wasn't."
Of course,
that was a bit
nothing
daft.
is right. There's no such thing as right, and this is people don't understand what science is. Science, science. First of all, science isn't a thing. Science is a method. Science is the way that we go about trying to understand the world, the natural world, whatever it is, with the data we have. And we make, we write it up and we talk about it and we test it. And if it, if we don't break it, then that's the best thing we've got at the time. But everything changes. It's like we had gravity all sewn up. Well, we had physics all sewn up at the beginning of the 20th century. Well, that's physics done, wiping our hands. And then Einstein comes along and says, well, hang on a sec, what about this? And then this, and so it's onions. We're always peeling it back. And there is no end. Science isn't going to suddenly end. And everything that we know about science today, all the things that we know about, are always subject to change. And that's why it works.
That is why
science
it works.
Is, for all of its faults, its greatest power is the freedom to doubt, as Richard Feynman said. And that is what science is all about, the freedom to doubt. As soon as you are certain about something, you're no longer a scientist.
I love that. So this episode of Fluff Me Lines, this podcast.
That's okay. This is the thing.
I'm okay with that.
Okay,
in fact,
to fluff your lines. It depends on the content.
I'm going to leave that in.
Leave it in. This is the great liberating thing, I think, about things like podcasts and social media. It's taken away a layer of formality, which I think is, it's all, I love the formality as well. I love a beautifully crafted piece to camera, whoever David Attenborough or James Burke or whoever you want, doing a beautiful piece to camera, or Brian Cox. I love that. But also the informality of a fireside chit chat, which is why podcasts are so successful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is good.
So this is
Keep your fluffs.
I'm gonna do it now. So this is a Tree Lady Talks podcast. It's a very wide-ranging podcast talking about social science, natural science, people's stories, etc. But I wonder if trees are important to you, Dallas. If you've got a favourite tree near you, or have trees played a part in any pivotal moment in your life?
Yeah. Well, like it's funny actually, just thinking about trees. I think about Newton's tree, at Woolsthorpe Manor, the famous apple tree that Newton sat under and an apple fell on his head, except it almost definitely didn't happen like that. He talks about apples, and I've been to Woolsthorpe where Newton lived and worked, and I've seen the tree and have stolen apples from it and made an apple pie with it. But
Yeah.
it's funny, it's funny because I've been researching Robert Goddard, who was an early American rocket scientist, the turn of the century, and he had an epiphany with a tree as well. He was pruning a cherry tree in Worcester, Massachusetts, and he looked out, and it was October in 1909. Well, somebody will correct me. Around about then, 1903. I can't remember now exactly. And he had this great epiphany. He'd been reading War of the Worlds and thought, well, okay, if we were going to explore the universe, what would we have to do? He had this great epiphany. Anyway, and he came down from the ladder, a changed young man. He was 17 at the time, but every single year, he called that his anniversary day, the 19th of October, and he would go back to the tree, photograph the tree. Even if he wasn't there, he'd mention it in his diary. And so trees do have this, they are sort of markers in our lives, aren't they? My dad's house had a big oak tree, and of course, we lived in that tree, when we were young kids. My brother John built a tree house up there, and that tree is still there, and and where I am now in London, the plane trees I'm very fond of. Yeah, I love trees. We all
Yes,
love
most
trees.
people do. Well, that's
Have you ever met anyone who doesn't love
yes,
trees? They've gone, those tree
yes,
things? I ruddy
yes.
hate
I
trees.
have. I
No,
have.
you haven't.
Yes.
Really?
Some people just don't see them. They don't even come into their consciousness.
There's something, they touch into a bit like the Voyager records on the golden discs on the Voyager spacecraft. There's an appeal because they touch deep time, or they remind us of time in a way that nothing else does. That there's something really quite I suppose why trees play such a important part of our fiction and our mythology. Trees are always present because they represent a kind of permanence. They represent a link to the earth, and also back in time, and they bind us. And there's something about their permanence and their inability to move, and their marking of space and time. Sorry if I'm getting a bit pretentious.
No,
There
no, I
is
love it. I
there
can
is,
I can do
but do you know
pretentious.
what I mean? There is
It's
something.
absolutely true. They are there. They make us feel grounded, and they're also the love of trees is really in our DNA because one of my earlier podcasts I refer to quite regularly is The Wood Age by Professor Roland Ennis, who really demonstrated of how we evolved because of trees, because of the ability to rest and sleep up in the tree, which allowed our brain to develop and also to cook food with fire. And so human evolution itself is due to wood and trees, and it's innate in us to enjoy them and experience them
Yeah.
and just to feel grounded. But have I met people who don't like them? I've met a few who don't see them, who want to do something with a piece of land and the trees are in the way, or they don't like the mess. There are some people who just want everything clinical and clean, and that in the end will end the human race if we have everything clinical and clean. But no, it's really interesting that you as a non-tree professional recognise the importance to us as a race.
That's the thing. Again, it's that thing like you don't have to be a tree pro to
Exactly.
like trees. I did a podcast about the importance of fire and evolution on Paddington. I can't remember anything about it. It was a while ago.
Yeah, I shall search that out.
It's on there
So
somewhere. So yeah, I love trees.
is there something else that you'd like to talk about?
So I'm doing this research for this book, and I've been reading Robert Goddard. So Robert Goddard was
Yeah.
American scientist and engineer, turn of the 20th century. And he basically invented rockets. Rockets exist because of Robert Goddard. So there was sort of three of them. There's a Russian, Tsiolkovsky, same sort of time, and in Germany, Hermann Oberth, all came up with the kind of, did the maths that makes rockets work. You know, we've had rockets for centuries, you know, fireworks and that kind of thing. But to actually understand the mathematics behind rockets and actually make rockets that could go into space was, you know, it was these three, and there were others as well, so not three, but the three sort of main people. Anyway, I've been researching Robert Goddard and all of his diaries. I mean, he was an amazing scientist, and luckily for us, he kept like meticulous diaries, like every day of his life, and notebooks. And they've been digitized by Clark University in Massachusetts, and I've been online reading them. I'm just absolutely obsessed by him at the moment because of the quality of his writing and how he talks about his methods and how he goes through and how ideas form. And I found deep in one of these, he won the debating society competition at his school, and he had to do a speech. So this is him age 17. And I kid you not, it's the most beautiful kind of manifesto on what science is. I got obsessed. I had to print it out because I'm like, holy crap. Well, I won't do the whole thing because it's a bit long. Maybe I'll just do it. You're listening. I could just do the whole thing and then people could just tune off.
Oh,
No,
go
because
for it.
it's too long. Honestly, it's like 20 minutes. It's called on taking things for granted is what it's called. And it's just what we were talking about, this idea that everything that we know now, it will be changed and is subject to revision as new knowledge comes in. And the idea that things are impossible, just it's a kind of, we mustn't take things for granted. We must think openly. Anyway, the last line of this great speech, it's a 17-year-old. Each must remember that no one can predict to what heights of wealth, fame, or usefulness he may rise until he's honestly endeavored, and he should derive courage from the fact that all sciences have been at some time in the same condition as he, and that it has often proved true that the dream of yesterday is the hope of today and the reality of tomorrow.
Oh, that's clever.
What do you hope the human race will have achieved that will make you happy? If you could turn around and say, oh, I'm really glad that's happened, and you're 92.
What would I like to see? I would love it. I would love it if we discovered life beyond the Earth. I would love it even more if we discovered life or some kind of civilization that we could actually chat to. Like, that would be epic, I think. I think that would be very interesting. Whether terrible things would occur as a result, probably. But, you know, just from it, you know, if I was listening to the Today program on Radio 4 and I wanted a headline, that would be kind of cool, wouldn't it? I'd love it if we went to Mars. I'd love it if we set foot on Mars. You know, that kind of explorer spirit. I still hold. There's a book everyone should read. It's called The Worst Journey in the World by aptly Cherry Garrard, and he was on Scott's expedition to the South Pole. And the book is enormous. It's a great tome. And when we think about Scott, we think about the race to the South Pole. What people don't realize is they were there for a long time doing science and exploring and doing diagrams and taking, you know, in horrific conditions. And there's a section in the book called The Winter's Journey where they've been tasked to go to a particular bit of Antarctica. So they want to find these eggs, these penguins' eggs, because if they get the eggs at a certain time, then they could look at the embryos and they can understand a little bit more about evolution. So this is, you know, this is 1900 whatever, same time as Robert Goddard. And so three of them, off they go, walking hundreds of miles in the Antarctic winter to find these penguins' eggs. And it's the most extraordinary, the most beautiful, harrowing description of human suffering you will ever read, bar none. But their dedication, I mean, you know, it's minus whatever, 50. They're wearing, you know, skins. Their sleeping bags are rigid. Their sledges don't work. They've got no food. They have terrible frostbite. And they march and they find where the penguins are. They get the eggs. They manage to not break the eggs. They try and carry the eggs, months later. Their tent blows away. They're definitely going to die. They manage to survive. They manage to light a fire. A bit of fat from the fire comes up and takes one of their eyes out. Just it's endless. And they get back to base, weeks later, but they have the eggs for science. And I just that kind of human spirit. Honestly, I promise you, read this book. It's the most beautiful. It's from a different time, obviously, but it's the most beautiful description of human behavior. And there's a little addendum at the end where he takes the eggs back to the Natural History Museum in London, and he's like, "Well, we've bought the eggs," and they're like, "Yeah, we don't need them anymore. Yeah, we figured it out." So, but it's a story of sort of camaraderie and for me, I think it's the greatest science book I've ever read. Like that adventure that is science, that human reaching into the unknown in order to make the world better, to make our knowledge better, to make our understanding better. We've got a limited time on the earth. Like, what better way would you want to use it than trying to understand just how extraordinary nature is? I don't know. That's pretty good. Anyway, worst journey in the world. That's my pick of the week.
Okay. Well, your pick of the week. I Raise You. I can't remember the title of the book, but I read about Shackleton's journey,
Probably haven't.
which is absolutely blew me away to the South Pole. And what I took from that was his skills of management and
Yes.
leadership, and how about he
Yeah.
absolutely cared about his wonderful, talented team, and how they were stuck in the ice, and how they split into two groups, and one group was left behind sheltering on Elephant Island in this sort of upturned hull of a rowing boat, and the other half, including Shackleton, went across to South Georgia and across the sea, and for that I found that really gripping. And at the time, I took a lot from it in terms of management, because I was managing a large business at that time, about the time I met you, actually.
2 years ago.
And I think it's when you're in those extremes of environment, and they needn't just be physical extremes, it's when you really dive deep into yourself and learn about what you can and you can't do. And you see these, well, I mean, it needn't be a physical environment. It could be an A&E department in the pandemic.
Yeah.
But I think we're always drawn to those stories of heroicism and endeavour and getting through against all the odds. It's something in our spirit which brings us back to space, doesn't it? It's what we were talking about earlier, is that admiration of the person going up in the rocket, because they too are venturing into the unknown.
It's why this is it,
science.
and it's why the job description of the astronaut is so interesting, and it's changed so much over the years. When we first went up into space in the 1950s, it was test pilots. It was a certain type of person. The mission was to fly the spacecraft and stay alive. That was it. When we went to the moon, there was a degree of exploration in it, but it was still, the pool of people were all taken from the American military. But it's changed now. Nowadays, you have to obviously be a brilliant scientist, but you have to be a leader. You have to be able to be a brilliant communicator. You have to be a television presenter. You have to be a scientist. You have to be an artist. All the things. It's such an amazing. It's why when you meet astronauts, that you're like, crikey, these people are really quite extraordinary characters. And it's funny actually reading Worst Journey and reading, it's like you say, the leadership, the way that they looked after each other, and the way that there was no one was ever panicking. It was that sort of clarity of thought, and that golden thread running through them of humanity is so important.
Yes.
They were there for doing science, and I always think like people think of science as like people in white coats and crazy hair and bubbling flasks. I'm like, no, that's not. Go read Worst Journey. It's a human thing.
Yeah.
Science is a human thing.
Question of the week. Can I ask about what place you were in when you met Tim Peake, and what you thought of asking him, because that must have been quite a thing. My head would have been all over the place.
I know Tim well, and I always love working with Tim because he's Earth's nicest human, but not just Earth's nicest human. He's there's a reason why you'd send Tim Peake into space, because he comes from a military background. He was a helicopter test pilot, but he's the warmest, kindest. There's no arrogance at all, and he's an exceptional human, and good fun as well, and you can dick about, but that's the thing, to be an astronaut, you've got to have a sense of humor, you've got to be personable, you've got to get on with people, you can't be an arrogant, you can't be a dick. That's question one on
Yeah.
that's the question one on the interview form. Are you a dick? I'd be a terrible astronaut.
There was a really good BBC programme a few years ago that we were gripped to, which was people going through the process of, it was literally a TV show of all these different multi-skills of physical fitness, emotional intelligence, as well as science, to be an astronaut. And it was a lady who won. And did you see that? Yeah, that was really good. And I also watched your interview with Tim Peake as well. It was a really good interview.
Well, I was lucky because I actually went with Tim. I was there for Tim's launch. I was covering Tim's launch into space in Kazakhstan, whenever that was, 2016, 2015. So I was out there in Russia with Tim and Tim's family, actually. It was there, so I was there with the BBC with Sky at Night. So I got to kind of, I was there when he was suiting up, and I was there for putting him in the rocket, and I was there for his launch. And so I've been sort of quite involved in that story. And actually, that's an interesting thing, Principia, which was the name of Tim's mission. It brings us back to the beginning of our conversation. It was such a unifier of people. Like, everyone kind of got into it. It became a big news story. And when we were doing the filming, well, I was in Kazakhstan, but the Science Museum in London was filled with kids, and it just became an event. A bit like the kind of, if you're old like me, you remember the kind of Queen Silver Jubilee in 1977. These kind of marker events where everyone kind of gets together and something happens. And that was that. It was Tim became such a massive star as a result of that. And it's a great thing to have, he's a great ambassador. He's a great ambassador for science, a great ambassador for space exploration, and annoyingly good writer. God, he's so annoyingly good at everything.
But if people want to pretend, can they hire a spacesuit from you?
Yeah, you can, actually. When I was a kid, I remember going, I can't remember where I was, maybe Chatsworth House or one of these kind of, I don't know, it was in an old stately home that I didn't want to be in because they were boring. But I remember seeing a suit of armor at the foot of the stairs in this big house, with a, metal suit of armor. And I thought it was kind of cool. And I remember thinking to myself at the time, because I used to watch Mr. Ben, the TV show Mr. Ben. Yeah.
Oh.
So Mr. Ben, right.
Excuse me. Okay. I'm going to rudely interrupt you because that is my favourite programme that's informed my whole life. Because my life is a Mr. Ben life.
So for the uninitiated, Mr. Ben lived an ordinary life. It was a cartoon, so 1970s cartoon. He lived on Acacia Avenue, and every day he'd put on his bowler hat and walk to work. But he had this secret double life where he would go to the magic costume shop at the end of the road, and he would pick a costume, a cowboy, an astronaut, a chef, a magician, whatever it would be, and he'd go into the dressing room and come back out, and he'd have an adventure in that costume. And so that idea of dressing up in order to live another life or to explore, I just thought was really kind of appealing. And actually, there is no costume more epic than the spacesuit. So I think from quite an early age, I'm like, I don't want a suit of armor at my stairs. I want a spacesuit, but a real one. That would be epic. And so I always had that kind of in the back of my mind. So I've become a bit of a collector of spacesuits. And a few years ago, Chris Riley, who I love dearly, Chris Riley is a director and a space historian who I work with a lot. We made a documentary series. Well, we did a documentary about the history of the spacesuit, and we got to go to the Smithsonian in America, where all the Apollo suits were. They're all kept in, special, storage. We got all the Apollo spacesuits out, the real ones, the actual ones, all still covered in moon dust. That was a highlight. Wow. I'm like, wow, this is great. This is like the ultimate Mr. Ben adventure. Anyway, I have one. made by a guy called Ryan Nagata, who makes spacesuits for movies. Big, first man. He made spacesuits. Anyway, I've got one of his suits, and it's a if you want to look like Neil Armstrong, it's bang on. It looks good. Most spacesuits you rent look shit. They just look wrong. There's just something not quite right about him. But Ryan is he's like next level in his skill. So I have one of his suits. I had a real suit, actually, a couple of real suits for a while. In fact, in this flat, there's one time I had 5 real spacesuits, which I had don't ask why. Maybe it's a bit of a fetish. I don't know. Might be.
How funny. So, folks, if you're thinking of dressing up as a spaceman, then go to Dallas Campbell's website.
Oh, you got this is how you know about it. Yes, it's on my website.
That's how I know about
people,
it.
It's funny. I mean, I get like emails every day of like people wanting to can I rent your spacesuit?
So the reason why I got so excited when you said about Mr. Ben, because I love Mr. Ben, and I've always joked as a female arboriculturalist that my life is like Mr. Ben's, in that one minute I am building site arb with my hard hat and my high vis on, and the next minute I may need to do something formal and be businesswoman arb, and my kids are grown up now, but then I was mum in a sort of apron in the kitchen, and I've always felt that my life has been a series of it's Mr. Ben, and I've always enjoyed that slightly comical going on building site, or be tree surgery, all my gear and everything.
We're playing parts. You wake up and you put on your suit or you put on your high vis and you play that part. And clothes are I love clothes. I love how they transform us. It's like wearing a mask or something. Yeah. We become different people. There's a lovely, actually, in the Scott Polar Museum in Cambridge. And they've got a lovely little museum that charts the history of the golden age of polar exploration that we've been talking about. They've got a big dressing up box, and you can put stuff on, and when you put stuff on, you change, you become that. I always, even when people are wanting to talk about public speaking or learning to be think about what you wear, not in I want to look terrific way, but just think about how clothes change the way that you feel. When I was at university, I always wore a suit to do exams. And the reason I did was because I knew at Oxford and Cambridge, they always had to wear sub-fusk, they had to wear gowns. And part of the reason for that is, yes, it's tradition and everything else, but it just elevates you. You just feel, you carry yourself better. It kind of focuses you. You just, if you just turn up in your pajamas, it doesn't quite work as well. So I always used to wear a suit and a tie and really make an effort to look smart, just because I thought it might make me do my exams better. Didn't really. I still only got a 2-2, gentleman's degree.
Well, so did I. I got
all the best people got 2-2s.
Yes, which in those it's right. The interesting
and you had extracurricular activities
absolutely
going on. Yeah,
absolutely, I did. Yes, mostly waitressing, I'm afraid.
Were you? Okay.
Yeah, but no, I really do agree that clothes play a part in how you feel and with presenting and with public speaking. Interestingly, I think it's partly fashion, partly age, but I've got less formal. I went through the power dress phase.
Well, fashion's important, obviously, fashion is a thing, but clothes are such a big part of our identity and how we think. Anyway, I have wide-ranging interests.
Well, so have I. And this is actually a tree podcast, and it doesn't matter.
We've only mentioned trees like a couple of times.
No, that's all good, actually. I just wondered, where do you think science communication is going? Do you feel that it's of real benefit that people can read TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn post, television,
I think
radio?
It's all good. It's all good. I mean, you've got so much choice now. And there's good and there's less good. That's the thing. It's and there's stuff for everyone, whatever your tastes, how you like to think about things.
Is it just me, Dallas, or are people reading more non-fiction now? Or is it just me who's reading more non-fiction? Because I read a lot of non-fiction on psychology, personal development, natural sciences, and occasionally some random book, history. And I just absolutely love it. And I've also got I'm actually reading a book at the moment called Whispers in the Forest, and it's by Sarah Maitland. and she is one of the most beautiful writers I've ever read, and she writes from a folklore, fairy tale perspective of our forests in the UK and how that links to very old fairy tales, and it's a social history of that, and it delving into our deepest, darkest feelings about what, say, Rapunzel was really about, or Hansel and Gretel. So that's just what I'm reading right now, and I actually would like to get hold of that wonderful author Sarah and actually interview her for the podcast, because I think that informs generations of how some people had perceived forests. For example, they'd be nervous of going in there, like somebody I was with for a long time who said, well, I don't want to go in the forest, there'd be goblins and elves, and he was being funny actually, but he still had that childish fear. I just have observed that more people on the tube or wherever are holding a physical book again. They're reading non-fiction, and quite often it's sciencey. Is that through my own narrow prism, or as you, as somebody who's out there more, you think, yeah, people are reading more science and listening to more science podcasts?
Well, I think so. I mean, but then I spend my life reading science and thinking about science. It's funny, actually. I have a book from, again, 18 somethings of Scottish folklore. There's a lot of forests. It's so interesting you talking about forest and folklore and how it informs us. Have you read any Joseph Campbell?
No. I'm writing it down.
Yeah, Joseph Campbell is famous. He wrote a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces and The Hero's Journey. And basically, in the 1950s, he went around the world, well, not physically, but he was an anthropologist. He went around the world. Was he an anthropologist? Maybe that's the wrong term. Anyway, he was obsessed by story and collected folk stories from all different cultures all around the world and noticed that they all had similar things in common, even though these cultures were completely separate, had no connection to each other. Somehow they found their way to finding the same stories. And, he became very, very influential in screenwriting and novel writing. Joseph Campbell understanding what the kind of archetype stories are, how stories work, what are those common threads. And there's always, things like forests as symbolic moments when humans are challenged. They sort of tend to happen in forest. There's always the cutting through of the forest in order to get to the other side. Things like Star Wars is a very good example of sort of Joseph Campbell. George Lucas was obsessed by Joseph Campbell and basically wrote Star Wars based on the Joseph Campbell model of the hero's journey. You have the hero, there is an inciting incident, there is the battle of the forest. It's when Luke Skywalker, when he's in the he meets Yoda in the kind of forest and he has to go and fight Darth Vader. Forests are just Narnia is the other example, isn't it?
Yes.
Those sorts of things.
Often magic happens.
Magic happens in forests. Hansel and Gretel.
Yes, always.
You have to enter the forest and you have to kind of somehow leave the forest.
Yes, you might leave it changed.
You leave it changed, exactly.
You may have had a challenge in the forest.
That is very Joseph Campbell.
Yes.
And it's you see it in all folklore, in all cultures, in all times.
Yes,
and
you do.
It's an interesting thing.
It's deep within us.
There's no forest in Top Gun, I noticed.
No, I did enjoy Top Gun the Maverick.
Yeah, me too.
It was actually just a bit of fast fun. And sometimes we need that.
Yeah, there's no forest, but it's just a massive testosterone-driven.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it so much, I went out and bought the motorcycle from Top Gun.
Did you?
Yeah, yeah. That's my midlife crisis knows no bounds.
Well, Dallas, I'm going to ask you now, finally, what's your dream scenario?
Well, my dream scenario is that my real dream scenario is that I hope AI, which is this great coming wave, if anyone's read the book, turns out not to destroy humanity and maybe enlightens us a little bit more. And I hope that science never ends as well. That's what I hope. I hope that for every new discovery we find, new questions will arrive, which will be even more exciting. That's what I hope.
I agree. We should always be asking questions and never stop exploring. Dallas Campbell, what an absolute joy to speak to you today. So thank you.
My pleasure.
And just before we go, time to tell you about our very exciting new conference in February 2024.
Trees, planning and construction. Is it really working? Do you feel isolated? Well, this conference plans to change that. We're here at BS 5837 Speed Briefing. Biodiversity net gain. What does it mean for trees? And trees and planning law. Are you up to date? Sarah Dodd will tell us. Hear from keynote speaker Keith Saker and Jeremy Barrell. We'll hear the views of London Tree Officer John Ryan on what works well and ideas for the future, and a panel of experts, a planning consultant, highway engineer, demolition contractor and building contractor, and I will be saying what works for me. All this and outdoor demonstrations on the 20th of February 2024 here at Braxted Park. And thanks to our headline sponsors, Bartram Trees, we're offering cut price tickets for tree officers. See us at Sharon Hosegood Associates /training or Eventbrite Trees, Planning and Construction.